So, Revelation, sans anxiety. First question is, have you read it? Have you read the book? Ever in your whole life?
When I was a young life leader.
A young life
leader.
Did they make you lead a group
16
on it?
years old. They gave us. We started with that book, the leadership program. And man, you should see the question marks over my head. You can still see the highlights in the book. It's the Living Bible. I'll never forget it.
Really?
Yeah, we started with.
Did they give you any materials to help you?
Just we started reading.
Just the Bible?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Because they knew that would get their attention.
Well, no doubt. No doubt.
Yes.
Wow. Anything that stands out or is there a particular reason if you haven't read it that you haven't, or if you have, what has stuck with you from it?
Well, I think one thing that, and you said it in your prayer, that it's God's final victory, but in my mind, God's final victory was victory over death and hell, and when the New Testament and Christ came.
Yeah.
And what else is there to do?
Yeah. This is a great question, Larry, and we were going to get there.
The thing that I was explained to me once that, this was written at a time when Christians were under persecution and they could not be open about what they were talking about, so it was written in code that made sense to them back then. So much like if you were to say in 2020, the donkey beat the Republican, or beat the elephant,
Yeah.
we would understand it.
Yeah.
1,000
I
years
get
from
them
now-
mixed up all the time, so I might get it wrong.
1,000 years from now, they'd be like, what the heck are they talking about, a donkey beating an elephant?
Yeah.
But that was, so the code made sense to them back then, because I read it like 3 years ago, and I was like, damn, that was hard.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've read as a teen, and that was along the time frame of late great planet Earth and Josh McDowell's evidence that the man's a verdict and all that. So at that time, I was reading it with a totally different lens than what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
I had problems with that lens.
Yeah, no doubt. So most of you, most people in this area, I'll put it that way. What you will hear is what we call a dispensational view of Revelation, which means dispensation is a really long word that just means age, like epic, right? So people read Revelation with this frame in mind of what we read here is about one age ending, another age beginning, and it's marking the seasons of God's dispensation in the world, right? So, and you will hear a lot of people talking about, how many of you, now I grew up in a Pentecostal holiness tradition, and we talked about the rapture all the time, and we were very scared of being left behind. And have you read the books? Has anybody read the Left Behind series books? You do read? Yeah. They're terrifying. They're terrifying. It's a really good scare tactic, right?
I had never heard of the rapture until I was in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is the rapture? There are people talking about the. I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Well, you're a good
I was
Presbyterian
raised in
then.
the church.
Yeah,
I
we
didn't
didn't
know.
Well-
No, we didn't talk
We
about
didn't
it either.
Yeah.
No.
When you wouldn't. It's not at home in the Reformed tradition whatsoever. Matter of fact, if you want a real hard homework lesson, go read the book of Revelation this week, and you bring back a hint of the rapture for me from the book of Revelation. I dare you. You won't get it. There are. We created it's a social creation out of a specific period of time, and it was my mother's milk, right? I mean, I'm telling you, I was brought up on that. Like that was
Wasn't that like 1800s an
turn
American?
of the century.
Yeah.
Turn of the 20th century. It's interesting because you get two almost two like divergent theological traditions that sort of crop up out of the early 19th, the turn like into the early 1900s, right? You've got on one hand the Pentecostal holiness movement, which blows up right about then, and then on the other hand you've got the social gospel movement, which is like they're almost they're not at cross purposes with one another, but they're so different. And the Pentecostal holiness movement continues because, I mean, in those days and in those early decades after the turn of the century, things were hard, right? This is Depression era, and times were tough, and times did not cease being tough because we go from that right into great wars, right? And so specifically World War II is the thing that broke the social gospels back, because the whole thing with the social gospel was we're going to be able to make it better. We're going to be able to do the things that Jesus said to change society in such a way that we're going to hasten the return of Christ. And then 20 million Jews are murdered in Europe. And then they start thinking, well, maybe our project is actually not reasonable. Maybe things are really, really broken. The Pentecostal holiness tradition, on the other hand, is a little bit sectarian in, that no smoking, no drinking, no dancing, no listening to secular music, don't go to the movies. Like, we're trying to pull away from society, which, you kind of get that vibe from a letter like John's, and we'll get to that in a little bit later. But yes, there are social things happening then. There are social things happening when John writes. Yeah. Anything else that has stuck with you about the Book of Revelation?
Where did they dig that out of there? That they said there was going to be a rapture.
The rapture, it's like a couple verses in Matthew or Mark, and a couple of verses in Thessalonians.
Yeah,
And
it's,
ignore the rest of the
cherry
book.
picking.
That's it. That's it.
What about the 144, 12 times 12 or 144 something or others?
All symbolic. Yeah, the
I know it's
144,000.
baloney, but what church is that?
Oh, those are the Mormons, I
That's the
think.
Mormons.
Oh,
Yeah. So
Really?
Church
It's-
of Letter. Mormon
Yeah.
or is the Church of Letter?
No, it's
It's
just, well.
Is it
Jehovah's
Jehovah's
Witnesses?
Witnesses?
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
yeah, so that's in here. We'll get to that too.
Okay.
That's in Revelation. Yeah. So the 144,000. It's 12 times 12,000, right? It's 144,000. 12 tribes of Israel, 12,000 members from each tribe, and there you get your 144,000. It's highly symbolic. Yeah.
I gotta say, I never really, all growing up, Revelation was not, I don't ever remember being taught about Revelation, other than I needed to know that it was a book in the Bible for confirmation. And I remember years ago, and somebody might be older, there was a mini series on TV, and it was like a doom and gloom, almost like a horror type of a mini, I don't remember, but it was all about that kind of stuff. It was the numbers and the mystical, like the things that were happening, and this was connected to this, and it was all very much like a Indiana Jones.
I would say like a Dan Brown novel.
Yeah, like a Dan Brown, like a Da Vinci Code type of a thing. And I can honestly say that that's really the only thing I know.
Yep.
Is that there was all these weird,
Yep.
this is going to happen, and the sign of this is coming, and the light in the sky is this, and the beasts and this,
So
and that, the other.
that is all reading Revelation, and again, this is the most popular way to do it. This is all reading the Revelation through this dispensationalist lens, which is to say, here is the era in which we are in. Here are the signs that you can look for in our world that will tell you where you're at on the timeline of Revelation. Right? It's all about like decoding current events for the sake of trying to figure out what's going to happen next.
Like a giant conspiracy theory, I just remember being.
It's a very, and it fails every time, right?
It was
Like
very
everybody has been the Antichrist. Like
Right,
Bob Dole was the Antichrist for a while.
Right.
Because somebody else I think Mikhail Gorbachev was the Antichrist. Like everybody's. Obama was the Antichrist.
Mikhail Gorbachev.
I just learned recently that Trump is the Messiah. I just learned. Why are you laughing, Larry?
I don't know. I voted for him. That's freaking hilarious.
Yeah, there's a guy out who wrote a book called Trump, Christ's Messiah, or something like this, and it's insane. But like, this is what you end up with when you try to like make these 1-to-1 comparisons with a book like Revelation. Yeah, Deb.
Yeah, but I was also not raised learning about the rapture, but there is so much in literature, in TV, in movies, in everything that you almost, there's no way you can't know about it at this point. And even though you think it's not real, I mean, there are times when I'm like, I think I'm the only one left behind. Last Thanksgiving, I left early and went to get a newspaper from my friend's house, and I was like, "There's nobody else out here. It's just me."
I've got my handbasket all decorated too.
It's very strange. It's very strange
how you think of that.
it gets in you.
But it's almost a sales pitch
Well,
for televangelists.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, let's get them scared to death, and
Yeah.
Jesus said, "Give me $1 million." I mean,
fear is a really excellent short-term motivator. It is absolute shite when it comes to long-term development. Right? It's really, really great if I'm trying to make you do something right now for me. Fear works. I mean, it's our political system is built on it. Without fear, we don't have the current politics that we have. That said, long term, I can't. How many times can I scare you? Well, like, I mean, if I was going to use this tactic, right? Like, how many? I would have. I mean, it was the bread and butter on which I was raised. Like, it was constant fear. But that is how we read Revelation. That's how everybody reads Revelation. It's a mistake. There is so much better to learn about it, and so here's
it's
go
exciting,
ahead.
and it's exciting and it makes sense.
It is exciting.
I mean, the rapture is a great story if everybody gets taken up, and it's kind of like that.
But everybody doesn't.
Yeah. It's kind of like that Benjamin Franklin quote about God loves him, he helps himself, or whatever that is. That most people would swear it's in the Bible because it makes sense and it should be.
Teach a man to fish.
Yeah. And I mean, that
That's
whole
in the
thing
Bible
of,
too, next to
good
that
people,
quote.
we're getting sucked out of this. That should be there. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But
There-
it's not.
I mean, my favorite whipping boy is American meritocracy. I think that this is like the chief sin of America, and the way it has taught us to relate to faith is that you get what you deserve, right? And this idea that if I'm just good enough, I'm gonna get sucked up, right? Even if nobody else gets sucked up, I'm gonna get sucked up if I'm good enough. Fits really nicely with the stories we tell ourselves about faith in America. The problem, of course, is that it's as though somebody handed you a book of collected poems and told you to read it like history, or worse, read it like prophecy, right? And so that is John's revelation is this weird mix of epistle, letter, right? I mean, that's what it's written like, isn't it? I, John, had this vision that Christ gave to me. We're going to read that passage here in a minute. And then it is part apocalypse, which is just revealing, right? And it's part prophecy. Like, it's all like kind of sort of in there mixed together. So no wonder we have a trouble reading it. It doesn't neatly fit in any perfect category because it isn't even pure apocalyptic. And we'll get to what that means in a second. But and it isn't pure prophecy. Neither is it pure letter. Like, it defies categorization in a little bit, in a lot of different ways. But if you try to read it literally, it is literally insane. This is the image of Christ that you get from the first chapter of Revelation, right? A sword coming out of his mouth. He's got the 7 stars in his hand. He's got eyes like a flame of fire. he's treading the wine, the wine of God's wrath here. Like these things, if you read it literally, you're gonna go bonkers because it doesn't make any sense. And the places where it does make sense, it's either terrifying or insane or reflective of a God that I'm not sure I want to worship. Okay? We've got, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? There are actually people riding on horses that are pale and red and white. And, is that what we actually think is going to happen?
No.
Just imagine this. Right? If we're going to read this literally, if these are our options to read literally, here's Revelation 13, 1-4. Hey, if somebody want to give that a run, imagine this creature in your head. Go ahead.
And they saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its head were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth, and the dragon gave it his power and his throne and authority. One of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed.
That's why pretty much everybody in recent history that's had an assassination attempt or been shot gets cast as this particular beast, right? This is how we read, right?
Okay.
That's Bob Dole, that hand issue.
Yeah.
This is why.
Yeah.
This mortal wound. Yeah, go on, Larry. Go on, Larry.
Okay. Death blood, mortal wound healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast.
And this is why also this following that this person has, that's why it's always big time global leaders too, right? It can't, your neighbor Chad might be a jerk with like a lame arm from an accident. He can't be the beast, right? He can't be the Antichrist. Go ahead.
They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?"
Great questions. So, but imagine that conglomeration of a creature, right? So you might think, all right, well, either we have to read this literally or it doesn't mean anything. This is, again, the wrong way to read it. John is situated in a particular situation with a particular set of circumstances in a particular culture. John's also likely not the John that wrote the 4th gospel. They think it's probably just some rando Palestinian that was a prophet that read it, that attached John's name to it, because that's what people used to do all the time. It's not a big deal. Doesn't really matter. Not the point.
Or his name was John also, because
Correct.
That was a common name.
Correct. So, but it is almost absolutely the case that whoever this John was, or whatever their name was a Jew, right? And steeped in Jewish culture and understood the scriptures. So if you read something that references a leopard, a bear, a lion, all in the same category of creature, your mind is going directly, do not stop, do not pass go, to Daniel 7 through 14, right? Daniel has a handful of visions in which these creatures figure prominently, and these creatures figure as representations of different periods throughout the world history and different powers, political powers at play in the world. So he's not just making stuff up, is what I'm trying to say. It sounds made up to us. But to Godwin's point, if someone was to write this today, a donkey and an elephant would definitely be part of what it means to be the beast. For sure. And the Green Party, and the Forward Party, and the Yang Gang, and everybody, this would all be, and it would be wearing a MAGA hat, right? This is what it means to use the political imagery that you have in your time for this purpose. So if it was, they would use the political imagery that they have now for this.
Mark of the beast on the forehead, right there, that MAGA hat.
There you go.
Well, it's almost like they're talking about Rome.
They absolutely are talking about Rome, but we're gonna get there. I want to bring it. We're going to get to the nitty gritty in the weeks to come. I want to give you 10,000 foot for the next handful of minutes.
It sounds like they had hallucinogenics back then.
I mean, it sure does. It sure does. It is literally insane, but it is poetically really beautiful, right? So this is, if you look at the description of the New Jerusalem that comes down of heaven adorned adorned like a bride for her husband, it's a block, right? It's a square cube. And that doesn't make any sense either, because who builds a city like that, right? And it's got 12 gates. They're all, right? So, like, it's all symbol. It's all symbol. You might not be able to read this. I'll read it. This is Revelation 7. After this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. The Lamb, by the way, is Christ. He shows up as a lamb that looks like it's dead, and it also has some wicked horns and weird crap going on in its head. It's a strange thing, but we'll get there. Standing before the Lamb before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white, with palm branches in their hands. This is a thing that we've seen before, right? They cried out in a loud voice, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb." And all the angels stood around the throne, and around the elders, and the 4 living creatures, which are crazy, and we'll read about. And they fell on their faces before the throne, and they worshipped God, singing, "Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen." And then one of the elders addressed me, saying, "Who are these, robed in white, and where have they come from?" I said to him, "Sir, you're the one that knows." And then he said to me, "These are they who have come out of the great ordeal, the raptured ones." That's how they'd read that. Doesn't mean that. "They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." Anybody ever get blood on your shirt? Does it make it white? "For this reason they are before the throne of God and worship him day and night within his temple, and the one who is seated on the throne will shelter them. They will hunger no more, and thirst no more. The sun will not strike them, nor any scorching heat, for the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." Do you think that there are actually people who have washed their robes in blood from a lamb that's supposed to be Jesus?
Well, I mean, isn't that a common theme amongst some of our brethren in the Christian, that we're washed in the blood of Christ?
They are. They are washed in the blood, and they talk about it all the time.
We used to sing about it on Sunday night. Are you washed in the blood?
Yes.
In the blood.
Yes.
So
It's a great song.
yeah.
It's a fantastic song. I just
Sunday
wish
night
that
song.
anybody had a sense of what it meant to be washed in the blood, right? 'Cause it's not literal blood. It's a metaphor for life, right? And nobody's actually ever going to wash you in blood, because that's friggin' weird, right? Like, and so
There's some weird people out there.
there are weird people out there, but what I'm saying is,
But
even
the Eucharist.
right. I was having this conversation with you guys the other night.
No, it was with the deacons.
It was with the deacons, and I was saying that the reason that I have pivoted us from the blood of Christ and the body of Christ to the bread of life and the cup of salvation is because eating a person is weird, right? And it doesn't mean the same thing now as it meant then. And the to skip from one metaphor to another to have to explain like 3 steps back is kind of a waste of all of our time. Why don't we just use cup of salvation, bread of life? We get the point, right? At any rate. And if anybody was concerned about it, during the words of institution, I say, "This is my blood, shed for the forgiveness of the sins of many," right? This is the new covenant,
This
shield
is
of my blood.
body broken for you.
Yes. At any rate. There are obvious problems that I would like to get out of the way straight away when we read. You're going to struggle if you read this book, and there are good reasons for that. One of those reasons is it's ridiculously violent. somebody read specifically, because we're running out of time like always, read the second paragraph of this.
Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Then another angel came out from the altar, the angel who was authority over fire, and he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Use your sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle over the earth, and gathered the vintage of the earth, and he threw it in the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for a distance of about 200 miles.
It's a little bit of blood. Talk about washed in the blood, right? But this is just the blood of somebody. We're not. It's hard to tell because the harvest is a common metaphor for God's own people, right? But clearly these are being trodden in the winepress of God's wrath, and they were grapes, but now there's blood, right? You can see the difficulty with the style that is apocalyptic. It isn't necessarily true. So some poems, does a poem always have to make perfect sense?
No.
Of course not, right? That's part of what makes poetry. Is that it's not perfectly linear. Not everything has to be one-to-one. This is how John writes certain sections of Revelation. It's just image upon image, metaphor upon simile. It's just he's trying to get something across, and this is what. But you will get a lot of violent imagery. I will say this. This is actually going to happen in the same way that God actually created in 7 days, 7 24-hour periods, and there was actually a flood that killed everybody but Noah and his family. Which is to say, this is mythological language that tells us something true without it necessarily having to be historically true, right? It's the Noah story isn't about God murdering everything on earth except for animals and 8 people. It's about God's righteous indignation with the ways that humanity has twisted its original purpose and has become evil, right? And it's about God's salvific intention for those same people who have done evil, right? God refuses to get rid of them all. The point, and again, and this is just my take on it, I don't need that story to be real for my faith to be solid, right? This is not a prophecy Nostradamus style. This is not going to happen. This is John's imagination of what it looks like for evil to have its comeuppance. Okay? So imagine that the worst sorts of things have happened in your world, and you would like for those things to have their comeuppance. Or imagine that you are, here you go. We would like it for everything to be gentle and kind. But if I could kill the theoretical, if there was a person, right, that I could kill that was the thing that is cancer, that is going to get Lily Camp, I would murder it, and it would be like this, right? Have that in your mind, right? What does it look like for evil to be demolished? Okay? And just don't let your 21st century sensibilities get in the way of blood and gore and guts, because it's an old thing, right? So that's one of the problems. The next problem is, again, it's not contemporary in style. We don't have something that is like this. Nobody writes like this anymore. The closest thing we have is poetry. Apocalypse, again, does not equal. This is apocalypse, at least in part. Apocalypse, at least in part. And apocalypse doesn't necessarily mean dystopia. WALL-E is by far the cutest dystopian film ever made. And if you haven't seen WALL-E, you should go home and rent it. It's a Disney movie, and it's wonderful. Actually, it's kind of ecologically minded, so you should go home and watch it with the past couple of weeks in mind. But we think apocalypse and dystopia, because more or less that's our own invention. That's not the case. Apocalypse, again, as I mentioned on Sunday, is apokalypsos in Greek, and that word means revelation. It's where we get the name of the book. Apocalypse is not necessarily only the style that John is, or that the writer of Revelation is writing in. It exists in other places, in our own scriptures and things that are sort of kind of our scriptures. So, but apocalypse in revealing exists all over the scripture, right? These are just moments of God's revelation, right? Where God sort of moves the curtain out of the way so that we can see what's actually going on. And we get this all the time, right? Genesis 28, where where Jacob has his moment where he's sleeping on a rock and he sees God, and he wakes up and he says, holy crap, surely the Lord is in this place. And I didn't even know it, right? He was afraid and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, the gate of heaven, Bethel, the house of God. And so that is a revelatory moment. That is an apocalyptic moment. For Esdras is another example. We're not going to read it because we're running out of time. But for Esdras is written in the style of apocalyptic. It's also second Ezra. It's in so if you have a study Bible that has some extra books in the middle of it that you never read, it's in there. But it is apocalyptic. It's one of the only other examples in the Bible. And again, this is apocryphal. These are apocryphal books. Those ones in the center that the Catholic think are canon, but the Protestant church hasn't agreed are canon. So this is one of those, and that exists in the realm of apocalyptic. Daniel 7 exists in the realm of apocalyptic. There are certain parts of even the Gospel of the Gospel of Mark that exist sort of kind of in the realm of apocalyptic. The next thing, the problem, and one of the reasons I think people shy away from Revelation is, again, it is not very modernly sensible. In that it has got some racy and pretty sexist bits. It uses language we don't normally use. I wouldn't encourage you to use in polite society. But here's the two women especially figure in this section. But essentially, I'll just give you the cliff notes of this. There is a dragon. This is, by the way, the birth of Jesus story. This is Christmas. We should read it. Somebody want to read it? Read the Christmas story a la Revelation, somebody.
A great portent appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars.
It's Mary.
She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs.
Also Mary.
In the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth.
This is where people get that Satan took a third of the angels out of heaven. Bada bing, bada boom. Go on.
Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days.
All right, so we can talk about details, but imagine this scene, right? There is a woman giving birth Middle Eastern style, so she's likely squatting, and there is a dragon positioned to consume the child, right? It is a lurid image. Next, we've got this. Then one of the 7 angels who had 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." All right, so there's more whores, there's more fornications, there's more. So at one point, shortly thereafter, the author says to come out of her, to come out of the great whore of Babylon, which is to say either literally to stop having sex with her, or to remove yourself from her tent of whoredom, right? Either way, we're talking prostitutes and we're talking sex. We're talking, and we're not talking, this is not like woman who's down on her luck. This is what I'm trying to say. It is not PG, and it is not polite, and we don't talk like this anymore. But the point that John is trying to make is that this is not like a down on her luck lady. This is like, it's kind of sexist, because it has like this sensibility of, you know, the great temptress going on, right? Which is a common theme throughout history. Anyway, the woman, the great whore of Babylon, is drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of witnesses to Jesus. There's just blood and sex and gore. It is insane. It's no wonder that nobody reads this and understands it, is what I'm saying, right? But I promise you we're going to make sense of it over the next couple of weeks. The last thing, and this is the big to do here, is I think that one of the reasons that we don't talk about Revelation is because it is overtly political. Larry is right. Babylon was Rome, right? And one of the primary things that the book of Revelation is doing, this is in the first couple of verses here. Grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come, from the seven spirits who are before his throne, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead and the ruler of the kings of the earth. The primary argument of the book of Revelation is that Jesus Christ is Lord and everybody else cannot be. It puts this nascent church into conflict with a world there's actually, so Godwin said earlier, and I think I've said in the past, so I may be the one that told you this, but I am learning that what I have been told over the years, that Revelation was written to a church under severe persecution, is actually likely not the case. A lot happened in the 1st century AD, the 1st century CE. Rome burned. Nero lost his mind and blamed Christians for it. Jerusalem was sacked by the Romans. Pompeii blew its top. Domitian took reign after that, and there is a trend from Domitian. Domitian is the last in his line, and then Trajan takes over as emperor of Rome. And so what had happened was, to make this new line transition a little easier to swallow and to make Trajan look good, everybody crapped on Domitian to make him seem like a really bad guy who was a lunatic. He wasn't. From all records, from all reasonable sources, Domitian was a pretty even-handed guy. There's only one actual martyr listed in the book of Revelation. If there were a ton, if John the Revelator knew a ton, he would probably tell you about them. He doesn't. They just don't exist. So what he's doing is juxtaposing not a church that is in persecution, but rather a political system that is anti-Christ. Not that it persecutes Christians, but that in that it tramples the poor, in that it looks out for profits first and people later, in that it is inequitable, right? These are all of the things that are timeless, right? But yes, it is political, but that politic looks like every single one of our political parties. It's political not in the sense of this, right? It does not care about your partisan politics. It is political in this bigger sense, right? Aristotle said that man is a political animal, and we've taken that to mean that man's gonna fight for his guy in the Oval Office. That is not what Aristotle meant. The Greeks had no sense of that sort of partisan politic, but what they did have a sense of is politics as something that was both social and civic and governmental, that was sort of everything. The word politic comes from city, right? The Greek word polis, which just means how are we going to live together? And so John sees the politic of Rome, the great whore of Babylon, in her many iterations, as purely in bed with satanic powers. And I promise you that John would say the same about every iteration of society since then. It's the same thing that Daniel did. It's the exact same thing that Daniel did. Daniel said, look at all of these beasts and look at the way they trample the people of God. And so it is a political argument about so this is it. This is my summation of that. This is a political claim against not just another political party, but all politics and powers who would use authority in unholy ways. That is what John is coming out against, with this primary argument that Jesus is king. And we see from the very beginning, and it's a through line through all of it, the reason that Jesus is centered on as the Lamb who was slain is because if you are living in a place with an imperial cult who says that you have to worship the emperor and that these are the ways that you get along in the world, and you could say, well, I'm a Christian and Jesus is king. And they would say, oh yeah? How did that work out for Jesus? He's dead, right? And the Christians would say, and John the Revelator says, no, sir. No, sir. He was indeed murdered, but actually he lives and he reigns. And actually, the revelation in all of this, the pulling back the curtain in all of this, is that all of you are out there clamoring that you've got it all, and that you know how the way the world works, and that Rome is the world's greatest power. But I am here to tell you that the one that you murdered is actually Lord and King of all. And, better yet, he gets what he wants, which is the restoration of all things, which is something that the Pax Romana, the Rome's great peace, could never give the world, right? It conquered by force, it took slaves, it did all these things in the name of peace and could never deliver on its promises. I have so many other things that I would say, but here's the central question, and here's what I'll leave you with. The central question of the book of Revelation is not how do I discern the times and the seasons, how do I make sense of this in my current environment. The central question of Revelation is how do we live in a world that demands and desires our allegiance? That is the central question of the book of Revelation. How do I live faithful to Jesus in a world where everything demands my allegiance? That is anti-Christ, right? That's it. And it's about the final victory of that God, whom you serve, and who will help you endure, right? These are the three themes that I've chosen, right? That God sees you, that God will enable you to endure through all life's challenges, and that finally God will put all things to rights, right? We are working our way there. How do we live in this world? Well, we know we're seen. We know that God will help us endure. And finally, we hang our hat on that God's going to do something about it someday. And we'll get there in the coming weeks. Grace and peace to you. Thanks for hanging out with me for a couple extra minutes.
Now, we'll all become recluses.